Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to Nick Kyle, who's the former president of the Scottish Society of Psychical Research. How are you, Nick?
I'm fine, thanks, David, for inviting me on your show.
Uh, how are you coping with the lockdown at the moment? We're all doing what we can.
Yeah, I find it a bit like a holiday, enforced rest, which initially I kind of rebelled against, but I practice meditation. I can leave this place anytime and journey. Yeah.
Well, there you go. You're only as far away as that, then, I suppose. So, thank you for agreeing to talk to us today. Very interested in finding out how you came to get to the point where you're a former president of the Scottish Society of Psychical Research. We're obviously interested in finding out about people's journeys and how you came to be interested enough to join an organisation like that. I believe you have a mediumistic background, or you can talk to spirits or communicate with spirits. Is that correct?
Yes, as a child, I used to sense earth energies. I used to feel that the stones shone in certain places, and as I grew older, I was able to get strong, clairsentient impressions, and occasionally hear or get impressions of words and messages. And when I confided in a minister friend of mine, he dismissed it as simply the influence of the Holy Spirit, something to be accepted, but not focused upon with a view to training myself. The problem was the Holy Spirit was adopting the persona of my old grandmother. And the conversation was very mundane for such a divine source. So I figured that I should join maybe a spiritualist church where they did train in two-way communication. And I attended a variety of churches and related mediumship groups. And now I don't like to label myself as a medium. I think everyone has some kind of intuitive talent, and mine's is clairsentience more than anything else. But I've met some transformative mediums who are definitely genuine and gifted.
Okay. Well, how did you get to the point where you wanted to go into, I'll use the term ghost hunting, the paranormal research, as opposed to, working more spiritually as you've been doing?
Yeah. I attended some lectures by the late Professor Archie Roy on an introduction to spiritualism, and I liked the idea of just because you believe in the possibility of life after death doesn't mean to say you need to kiss your brains goodbye, and that it was possible to adopt an evidence-based approach to understanding a wide range of phenomena. So as I began to attend lectures run by the SSPR in Scotland, I just kept learning and learning, and some of the medium that I became friends with, I learned a lot from them too. And eventually people came to me as a source of advice, and I started to respond to requests, and I was still learning. And indeed, I don't think we ever really stop learning. I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I've invested about 30 years in looking into the area. So I'm maybe 2 steps further along the road than somebody that might contact me.
Okay. Do you get contacted often? I wonder during these times of coronavirus, when there's a lot of sort of tension out there in the community, have you had any sort of contact from people?
In recent years, the answer to that would be no. It tends to happen through word of mouth, and I'm pleased if people aren't distressed by the experiences. I've also got a slight preference for not continuing to investigate cases the way I once did, with a real enthusiasm, because I think that the energies that are encountered can be a bit draining, a bit negative, and maybe even unpleasant, and not something to be delved into very often.
Oh, okay.
Now, in my meditation practice, I'm lifting my energy, and sometimes when I go into a haunted location, like the batteries in my camcorder, the energy drops, and I think that's part of the phenomenon.
So it's not a very pleasant experience for you then.
Sometimes it can be unpleasant. Yeah.
Okay. So what do you do? How are you keeping your finger in, or how are you keeping yourself involved? Not maybe doing the the sort of that
Yeah,
frontline
yeah.
type of
Well,
work?
I teach meditation. I do counselling on paranormal matters. I do a little bit of speaking, and I'm currently working on 3 different books. I've edited one, I've co-wrote another, and so on. But um, I've got plenty to do, slowing to the pace of life.
Oh, that's all right. So can you tell us what you were saying, that when you first heard Archie Roy speak, and he said just because you believe in life after death, you don't kind of need to turn your brains off. You can look for evidence-based ways of saying this exists. What have you learned in the time, the 30 years that you've been doing this? What kind of evidence have you found, or how to measure that evidence?
Well, I've been blessed with stunning, awesome experiences. I don't use that word lightly. If I was to categorize them, I've had materializations of people in out of thin air, who have been able to touch, to hug, to shake hands, and so on. And sometimes when I'm shaking hands, there's an arm but no body attached. And I don't talk about these things unless I have witnesses and corroboration. And I've always had witnesses for probably about a dozen experiences now, in which things have apported, disappeared, got flown into the ceiling or the walls, not always come back, accurate clairvoyance, temperature drops, touches, hands, invisible hands, children, all from the spirit world. And I've had them in circumstances that I can't explain, and I've gone to extraordinary lengths to try and explain it. So I'm personally convinced through experience rather than belief. I kind of thought when I started out that there would be some understanding that would suddenly make the paranormal normal. And in fact, Enrico Marabini, the grandfather of parapsychology in Italy, said to me before he passed, he said, "I don't like the term investigating the paranormal for your society." He said, "There is no such thing as the paranormal." And I paused because I hesitated to reply, because I knew he had really remarkable experiences of physical phenomena. And he said, "Nick, it's all normal for those to whom it happens." And I've often reflected on that, because I do think there is more to ordinary everyday life than what we see and can touch, what we can measure. And as I said to a group of Canadian investigators some years ago, if I had to pass a truth to my children as a result of my own efforts to investigate, I would say I have concluded that there's more to life than what can be measured. So go find it. And I think it's invisible presences or beings, and they don't have to be human, who seem to like us and want to help us. So I'd rather not upset them.
That's a fair thing. You just mentioned Italy before. You've been to quite a lot of countries investigating. You're not just in Scotland. You've been around the world, from the United States, Canada, Peru,
Yep.
Brazil.
Yep.
How did you find the way? What was your feeling about the way that people approach that? Obviously, the Italian fellow that you mentioned, he sort of he sort of said, look, the paranormal is normal. So that's from his point of view.
Marabini, yeah.
Yeah. How do other people in the rest of the world, deal with the paranormal? Compare it to the way we might here in Britain and England and Scotland.
Well, think of almost any belief that you've held for all of your life, and then think if someone told you that you'd got it wrong for an entire lifetime.
Yeah.
There would have to be, I think, some cognitive dissonance. There would have to be a sense of this cannot be true. And if you experience the extraordinary, the cognitive dissonance, the stress that it would cause, the threat to your sense of what is reality, would make you question it subsequently, diminish it in its importance, and eventually forget that it ever happened, perhaps, or certainly reinterpret it as being not what it was when you experienced it. I think most people don't want to talk about the paranormal, except in the sense of some kind of scary story at Halloween. It's not regarded really as a fit subject for mainstream academic study, although it's heading that way through people like Dean Radin, who's taken a scientific approach and come up with meta-analyses which strongly suggest the presence of at least a telepathic ability.
Yeah. So, what were some of the highlights of when you were the president of the Scottish SPR? What come some of the things, because that was obviously at a very high level from academic point of view, was and you were sort of representing an organisation. Was that a positive experience?
Yeah, I mean, when I started off, I was full of enthusiasm because I thought I was going to use the resources of this smallish organisation, the second biggest in the UK, to further my understanding of the paranormal, albeit it's a very wide umbrella term. But as the vice president at the time said to me when I was joining the society, he said, "Nick, that's not what you'll be doing. What you'll be doing is listening to people's reports of past experiences, and it's very unlikely that the world will be hovering when you walk into a house. You know, it'll all have happened and be done." I said, "In fact, your mere presence there as a hard-nosed skeptic it will probably collapse the energies that produce the phenomena." And actually, I found that to be usually correct. I would go into a place and the phenomena would stop. And usually it didn't come back, although occasionally it did.
I think that's a really good point you've made there. That when investigators go in, it is something that's already happened, and so unless it's continuing, all they're doing is trying to work out what happened in the past.
Okay.
How do you do that? It's like if someone walked past your house, you need to work out what happened.
But then it gets interesting, because if you go in as an experiencer, as a medium, as somebody who's got some sort of sensitivity to energy work, then sometimes spirit manifest and talk to you, rather than have to figure out indirectly what might have happened in the past. But these cases are rare, extraordinary. Yeah. Most cases are, and I don't mean to upset anybody that I've met in the past, but most cases are people who have got their own problems and issues, and the paranormal is a convenient get out.
Yeah. Did you have any particular favourite cases that you've worked on over the years that highlighted something that you learnt something particularly from?
Lots of cases. I've tried to be clear that I'm in learning mode in every case, and I learn something about people usually, but sometimes about the spirit world and interdimensional kind of communications. Can I tell you, not so much about my own personal cases, although I can if you wish, but cases I've been involved in, where I think the evidence is extraordinary. Yeah?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I was invited to an Italian castle, and the castle was closed, and the castle security was still in place. There was nobody in the castle except a team of investigators. And I wasn't present at that point, but they recorded the ghostly image of a soldier in the uniform and breastplate of yesteryear, indeed resembling an oil painting in the castle from the 17th century, I think. And the ghost appeared as expected on a kind of anniversary or an annual date, and was captured by an infrared camera as a rather grainy image. Now, given that there was an outer circle of castle security, an inner circle of a team of investigators, and the camera was running in an empty location we knew to be empty, getting a grainy, ghostly image is interesting. It's a curiosity. It's intriguing. And I say to people, this is the best ghost photograph in the world, because, and then I showed them the second photo. Right beside the infrared camera, running in an empty location, was a heat thermal imaging camera focused on exactly the same spot at the same time. And the heat thermal image shows the same ghostly figure or shape, but heat was coming from it, in particular from the upper arm, consistent with anybody who interprets these images of the body as being consistent with wound trauma.
Okay.
Now, that means that was not a visual anomaly or a misidentification, because there was something there emitting heat.
Yeah.
And there were curiosities that would make you think it wasn't some actor with a secret set of keys or giving a backhander to security, because the figure was perfectly proportioned, but about 60% of what a normal human being would be, miniaturized, if you like. And he didn't have any legs, because the landing he was standing on didn't exist in the time that he was a soldier, we think.
Yeah.
Now that's an example of one case where technology has been used to add to the evidence. I can give you other cases where ghosts have been analysed by the same software they use in satellites to analyse reflected light and say whether something is plant, wood, metal, different types of crops. And I would defy anybody to go into a landscape and identify the crops just at a glance. But if you use that same analytical reflected light software and you analyze ghost photographs, what do you get? You get told that the area you've identified as the ghost is different from its surroundings and is composed of a watery-based protein similar to egg white, or as we would maybe call it, ectoplasm. But it's definitely not a visual anomaly or a misidentification. Something is there. And you use audio analysis for ghost recordings, and you find that they don't have human vocal characteristics, but they sound human. Explain that. They have the voice box regenerated from the recordings of perhaps an animal. Or processed by a computer as analysed by two laboratories independently. In other words, we're finding that technology can be applied to traditional recordings and ghostly photographs and situations in which environmental monitoring can maybe shed some light. I noticed that in Skinwalker Ranch, there's been quite a bit of environmental monitoring over in America, the former Sherman Ranch, and the environment seems key to triggering the phenomena. I'd like to go there. One or two of my friends have already been, and they were very impressed by the phenomena, which they think is to do with the ground, but possibly also the atmosphere and the electrical fields in the air. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not, you don't think it's necessarily to do with the building, it's the two forces,
Land.
maybe the land and the sky. So
in that particular case, yeah. Right. So I've enjoyed. I was over in Seattle. I think it was 3 years ago now, with an investigator and a medium, and it was supposed to be a demonic haunting. I think it was haunted, but I think spirit were having a laugh. Mm-hmm. And I've rarely met any spirit communicator that I would call a demon. In fact, I think all of that language probably belongs to an earlier era. At one time, everything was to do with either God or the devil, a polarized view of reality. Then we got into spaceships and aliens and nuts and bolts technology and secret technology. Now I think we're looking seriously at the nature of dimensions that compose our reality. And we're recognizing that if there is a fourth or a fifth dimension of existence, then things would appear and disappear in our world simply because they're moving between dimensions. So I think in looking to the future, we will see that the word spirit is far too vague. It's a porridge word, I call it. You think it means something until you begin to analyze it. And I think we will begin to see that interdimensional communication is actually what it's always been about.
Okay, so would you don't use the word spirit, or you?
I use it only as a conversational term. I'm quite keen to go beyond it and start to analyse. So what do we mean when we say spirit, when it's non-human communicators?
Okay. Do you? This is something I hear quite often, and in recent years, when people talk about non-human spirits or non-human things, yes. It's a bit hard to understand because it is such a different idea. What is it? What is causing these sort of splits between dimensions then? Why does that happen? You said that was a fascinating story you said about the soldier, and that you had the heat and you could see that there was something there. Why does that happen? Why is that manifesting?
Okay, so the paranormal is an umbrella term for a very wide range of different phenomena, anomalous experiences, and it's not possible to give one explanation that fits even the vast majority. It's such a wide-ranging field. But if you say to me, why do ghosts appear or want to apparently communicate? Why do people want to communicate? Because that's often what they are.
Yeah.
Deceased human beings still have thoughts and feelings and intentions and purposes and connections with. So why shouldn't they come back and express their love and their grief for having left a situation where there was unfinished business, maybe? So I think there's a very human explanation for human beings who have gone over to the afterlife and wanting to return. If you ask me to focus on non-human communicators, maybe aliens or maybe just from other dimensions of existence, I think that it's not like levels of a skyscraper where basically there's not much movement between the floors unless you use the stairways or the escalators. It's not like that. It's much more like a boggy field or something in which there's real movement simply because you're there. And if you go into an energized, hot, or active situation, then I think it becomes bouncing between the dimensions in terms of how it affects your impressions and your psychic kind of experiences. And I think these beings have a range of purposes that are actually very little to do with what we want them to communicate. I mean, I've heard communicators say, is it okay if we don't entertain you with phenomena because we want to do our own experiments, but you might not see the results? Certainly not for a while. And we've always said, yeah, because it's not about putting on a floor show or a light show, such as happened at school. It's about, so what does that mean, and where does that take you, and how does it affect your understanding? Can I give you a litmus test for whether something's paranormal or not?
Yeah.
It's the person that had the experience transformed by it. Because I find that genuine phenomena so usurps our sense of the natural everyday order that we are powerfully affected over time. I'm not saying forever, but certainly in my case, my early experiences have kept me going throughout my life, and I still remember them keenly. If your listeners are interested, I would recommend that they go find the kind of experiments that I've taken part in only for 2 sittings out of 30 odd. So there's a lot more to the story than I can tell you. But the Scole experiment, spelled Scole, held in Norfolk and finishing in the late 1990s, would be the main source of extraordinary evidence. Incidentally, shown to more than 20 European scientists of the highest order, umpteen doctors and professors, and NASA was involved, though you'll not get them to admit that publicly.
And can you tell us a little bit more about Skoll? I've heard the name before, but
Yeah.
so what happened there at that
Okay,
experiment?
so basically, 2 mediums and 2, let's call them mediumistic people, a group of 4, eventually managed to get phenomena after years of trying. And the phenomena was so regular, so reliable, so impressive that they felt able to invite members of the public, specially selected people. And it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, but they never had a blank sitting. In a small cellar room of a mansion house in the village of Scole, S-U-L-E, near Dis in Norfolk, they met periodically, and they showed people light forms that whizzed around. They demonstrated accurate and impressive clairvoyance. They had materializations of objects and people, dematerializations, touches, objects levitating, moving around, people levitating. And they did this in front of scientists who were invited and who accepted the invitation for 30 sittings spread over 3 years. It was mentioned in 1 or 2 books and scientific reports and so on. But to be honest, it was more or less ignored because most of it happened in the dark, and mainstream scientists like to have the lab lights on.
Yeah, but you were convinced with what you saw?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word absolutely for very many things in life, but yes, absolutely. Can I just give you an example? Because
Yep.
your listeners will want a picture of. I'm sitting in the dark of a brick-built cellar in a country house, and the lights are out, and it's pitch black. I'm in charge of the door to make sure nobody sneaks in or out, and it's a concrete floor, brick-built arch ceiling. And after a few minutes, we were told not to worry if we didn't like the dark, not to worry about it, because spirit would light the room up. And I laughed, right? No electric light or light of any other kind, and the room lit up. Dimly at first, because lights appeared in the ceiling, the arch ceiling. And I sat there thinking, somebody spent some money to do a candid camera job in this. They've got a planetarium built in through light fiber optics into the polished, the painted white of the brickwork. And then I was gobsmacked when the lights came down to about head height and began to rotate around the room, illuminating sitters as they were sitting. And then there was maybe 20 lights, and they were zooming about, zipping at different sizes and so on, and they were touching people. So they weren't just visual anomalies. They weren't LEDs. And then you add in all the other phenomena that seem to come with the orbs, and you realize the only way this could have happened would be cutting edge special effects using holograms.
Yeah.
So I know some people in the movie industry, and I asked some individuals who do this every day, CGI stuff, and I said, if I gave you £1 million each, I spoke to 3 of them, I said, could you replicate the phenomena? And they said no. I said, guys, £1 million? Come on, there must be a partial solution. And you went, no, because of the way you've described it. First of all, it's a small room with hardly any room to move. We would need space for 3 large oil-dampened projectors, and we need constant line of sight. You say that lights went round furniture between legs, captured in hands. We can't do that. And he said, you also said that they kept their definition while zooming about the room. He said, as soon as we start to move our hologram, it blurs.
Mm.
And he said, you also said the lights touched people and could be held by people. He said, well, we can't do that. You touch a hologram and you feel nothing. And that left me feeling that there was something extraordinary taking place. But then that village is not far away from the St Michael Mary's ley line cutting across England with lots of earth energies. And I think that had something to do with it. I think the mediums that were there were gifted and specialised and focused for years in order to get to this point, which is maybe why it's not available to the ordinary man in the street or woman, because very few people are willing to put in the commitment. I sat for 10 years experiencing very little before suddenly things started to happen.
Yeah. So you obviously had to practice to get to just to be the master that they were.
I think you have to train yourself. So I was asked last night by a guest, why, if everyone has a psychic ability, why can't we all do this? And I simply said, can you run? And the guy said, well, yeah. I said, so why aren't you in the Olympics?
Yeah.
And he said, well, I don't have the time and the desire, and I certainly don't have the training. And I said, there's your answer. If you put in the time, if you make a real effort, maybe a little bit of financial input, travel and so on, and you put in maybe 10 years as I've done, I would be surprised if you didn't have anomalous experiences.
Yeah.
Well, the real difficulty, though, is sorting the genuine from the rubbish. So most people who have an ego want to puff up their own sense of having a reputation. So you find that lots of mediums want the world to know that they're a medium, and they put down other mediums and they overinflate and exaggerate their own abilities. And the mediums that I've been privileged to admire are very humble people, almost secretive. And they recognize as soon as they go public, they'll be subject to character assassination. They don't need that.
Yeah.
But mediums I've worked with are genuinely impressive, either for messages or for physical phenomena or for triggering experiences that make you think you've left your body.
Just before we go, what would your piece of advice be for someone that was just getting into researching, studying, maybe doing some paranormal research, what would be your advice for them?
Okay, so lots of people say, tell me all the equipment I need to buy. It must be hundreds of pounds of equipment. That's the best equipment is between your ears.
Yeah.
I said, because you have a natural inbuilt sensitivity to energies, and that's what's being manipulated. So maybe a video camera, maybe some very basic environmental monitoring, but more to pad out the story so that other people listening can know that some of the explanations have been taken account of. Other than that, you need a bold, almost fearless spirit of courageous inquiry, rigorous inquiry, vigorous. Lots of people, I think, get very frustrated when I listen to their stories and say, where's the evidence? It's not that I disbelieve people, it's that I want the evidence that matches the story. And I have to be honest and say it's rarely there, but when it is, you forget, you never forget it. It's always with you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Nick. That's been fascinating, and I'd like to maybe get you back one day and talk to you about a bit more about your experiences, because I think we've spoken for half an hour and we've only barely scratched the surface. So
well, I hope your listeners are prompted to go find out. That's what I would recommend. Find out for yourself.
All right. Well, thank you. You take care, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.